Ice cream so good.
Is this what you wanted? Is this what
Ice cream so good. Ice cream so good. Ice cream so good. Fire. Gang gang. Yes, Baku, yes, Baku, yes. 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 Ice cream so good.
Gang gang,
Wow.
yes, ice cream so good.
Well, that's the first time I've ever seen that intro, by the way. I did not know that was going.
I actually stole that from someone, so I need to link them.
Okay.
I completely stole it from someone.
Fair.
I didn't want to get your thoughts on yes, ice cream so good though.
I don't know what to think about it. It's like the end of the line, you know?
Sure.
It's like the bottom of Dante's Inferno. It's the very bottom level.
It's weird though, because like, I mean, again, it follows the Pareto distribution, like pretty much everything. But the notable people that are getting memed, basically, like they're getting like big chunks of money from doing this.
Yeah, I posted something earlier. It was like I can't remember how much she was earning. She was earning like 2,000 in one live stream or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm not that familiar with like TikTok and stuff, but each of those little items that fly across the screen, like they have like monetary value for the person doing the stream.
It's kind of like gambling. It reminds me of like old people in like a bingo in Las Vegas. Gambling.
Yeah.
It's like the kind of flashy.
It's even weird because I mean, like, so this is the first thing that came to my mind is like, okay, if I was going to make like $7,000 from doing that for an hour, I might do that, to be honest with you. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a huge financial incentive behind it, obviously. But like, who are these people that are giving this person money? Like, what? I never why.
So that's what I thought. Is I can see myself doing the gang ice cream so good, but who is the person that's like sitting there with their phone, like watching TikTok, and then occasionally they'll like give them an ice cream or give them I don't know what else.
Like, I don't understand. Is it sexual? Because it doesn't seem that sexual. I mean, obviously it's attractive women that are doing it, but it's like,
Yeah.
like there was another one with a kind of blonde, kind of elfy looking girl, and she would do all this kind of stuff, but every so often she would say this weird thing in this like really weird deep voice. I can't describe it. It was like it wasn't girly in any way. It was like all of a sudden it was like kind of evil, demonic, manly voice, and I just kind of wondered, like, that's not attractive, and like that's objectively not attractive in any way. So it can't be sexual. Like there's something else going on here.
This is definitely the most attractive person doing it.
Yes. Ice cream, so good. Gang. How should I put it? A hearty thank you to Lopez. Yes. No spicy. Show indeed such an act of slaying. Haha. Gang.
I'm pretty sure that's not. I'm pretty sure that's someone either doing an impression of him or an AI voice of him, because I don't think it matches the lips, unfortunately. But that would be amazing if we did do that in real life.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure. I think it's AI. Yeah. It's like
what worries me is like who are the people watching this, and who is like, because some of those rewards you have to pay like a fair sum of money to get and be able to give to the person, like, and all you get is them going ice cream so good in response, and to know that you want to call with the ice cream so good, I don't understand.
Yeah, I don't understand the motivation, but it's reducing like language to like the most like smallest thing possible. Like all the words they're saying are like these little, like it's like language within those bingo gambling machines, you know, like everything's just like a little picture, a little slot thing, a very reduced, compressed little expression of something stupid. It's very strange. I don't even have a hot take for it because it's still baffling to me. I know.
No, the language thing is interesting though. I mean, it kind of like something that I've been thinking about for a while, and I still have to kind of put this in a theory. I think it might be in the upcoming book, but one of my theories about language and the oncoming dystopia is the fact that, you know, it's being just pictorial and hieroglyphics and all that sort of stuff, and then it managed to elucidate itself and get more complex. And you know, now it's going back into like symbols. Like the main example I was thinking of was emoji, but yeah, this is like a different level. Like it's weird. It's like returning back to clicks and moans and stuff like that to communicate. It's very weird.
That's very true, and it's like a technological reduction as well because it's not occurring because we've suddenly had a big catastrophe, and then there's no more, you know, the technology or anything like that. Like there hasn't been a civilizational collapse, like which you would typically in a kind of classical understanding of like being reduced to a kind of hunter-gatherer primitive state. It's going about through the technology itself. So
yeah, but just kind of like accelerated through technology into like a different, I don't know, it's really like return to primalism through technology. It doesn't really make any sense, but it's confusing.
Yeah.
So anyway, we were going to talk about this film, Spaceship Earth, that you shared like a Guardian article on this thing with me, and I thought it'd be a good topic for conversation. I mean, it's a weird one because it's got a very like 90s aesthetic to it because it was all done back in the 90s, basically, this actual experiment. But it came out like in 2020, so it was very apt for COVID times. I was thinking like, you know, there'd be no like better place to be like during COVID than maybe in this sphere. I don't know. What are your sort of initial thoughts on the film anyway?
Well, yeah, the film, the timing was interesting because it was, you know, just as we were being put into lockdowns. So, or at least it came out during the first set of lockdowns anyway. So that was immediately suspicious to me because the film is quite a hopeful and positive take on the whole thing. It's not super critical. So there's a bit of propagandistic element to it in that regard. Overall, like, I mean, regardless of the actual experiment, which we can talk about in more detail, but I thought that just the characters of the film, they're kind of everything I hate in people. So it was hard for me to get through the whole thing without breaking my television screen because they have this kind of obnoxious boomerism kind of like hope in technology, a kind of scientism, like technology is going to save us all and we're going to evolve and elevate out of this lesser state of being into some sort of perfect harmony through technology. And also they're all theater kids. There's so much of the film where they're just doing these stupid plays and they're just like running around doing all these weird hand gestures and wearing masks and expressing themselves. And they're just like, they're just annoying theater kids and like rich people who have just gotten involved with like scientism. And it's just like, I hate you all.
Yeah. That's an important thing to latch onto. And I think this is definitely jumping ahead a little bit into the film. As like a reason to watch this film as a curiosity, like a cultural curiosity, is the fact, like you said, these are like theater kids in the film, but it has like, so the actual like meat of the film, I was really interested in the specifics of the actual enclosure and the specifics of the experiment and all that sort of stuff. That stuff is like such a small part of this film. You could probably cut it down to like 20 minutes. Like you could do a YouTube highlights of all the parts that are actually interesting. It's got one of the overarching themes is environmentalism, and specifically like the catastrophe conservationism. And I would actually say like Jane Goodall versions of like the animal world. And it's so funny because at the end of the film, when it shows them coming out of the experiment, there's literally Jane Goodall is giving a speech at the thing, like, and it's like, like, oh, everything about the natural world is wonderful and should be preserved, and human beings are just awful. And it's interesting that you mentioned the whole boomerism and theater kids aspect, because it does have a very kind of boomer liberal twinge to it. And the reason I say that is because out of nowhere, and I did not see this coming, like like when they wrap up the experiment and they need to work out what to do with the sphere, Steve Bannon of all people comes in. Did you watch the whole thing and did you see that coming?
Yeah, I watched the whole thing and I didn't see that coming. Although I read about it in the article because it said something about Steve Bannon getting involved, but I didn't understand in what context he got involved. But apparently, well, at least from what I understand, is that there was a billionaire who was funding the whole thing, and the billionaire was, funnily enough, part of a rich family who were kind of like oil barons. They owned oil mills or oil drilling companies or whatever.
Yeah.
And for some reason, when all these people left, there was all kind of discussion of what happens to all the data and research and what happens to the enclosure that they had built and all that. And they basically kind of ousted the leader and all of these people. It didn't explain why or what was the purpose of this ousting, but they ousted it and they planted Steve Bannon in as the new CEO. And they didn't explain why. Like, I don't know why they did that. It just happened.
It's so strange because I'm so glad I didn't read that article because I didn't know at all. And then when they mentioned Steve Bannon, I was like, wait, Steve Bannon? And then I was trying to work out from the pictures of him in the film, because obviously this is like 30 years ago now. Like, I'm trying to work out if that's the Steve Bannon, because he's not looking as not quite as chubby as he is these days and all that sort of stuff. But it just wanted to like actually click with me that it was actually Steve Bannon. And it's so funny because like one thing that kind of pissed me off about the film is it is a bit of a slog, I think, because like I said, there's like 20 minutes of actually interesting stuff in there, but like it lacks any real conflict in it, like that most of these biopics have, which is like, you know, or something bad happens and they have to find a way to resolve it, or there's conflict. There is like a little bit of that, but it's kind of feels very forced, and there's not really like any resolution at the end. Like one of the ladies who were in the sphere is like talking about how bad Steve Bannon is as a person and how he doesn't believe in climate change, and it's just like a really offhand comment, and it's like 3 minutes before the end. I'm like, how are they going to wrap this up? And it doesn't really have like an ending. It's very weird as like a film.
Yeah, it doesn't. I have the same criticism as like they didn't. I was interested as well in like the structure of the whatever it's called. I don't even know what it's called. Like this artificial ecosphere, whatever they're trying to make. It didn't really explain too much about it, and it didn't really explain like at the end like what was the point of it, like what they achieved or didn't achieve, and like what they discovered or didn't discover.
That is funny actually as well, because that's part of the Steve Bannon plot. Is they talk about how the data was either destroyed or is not being released or something like that, and it's not really specific about like what data it is, because I mean there's some like actual scientists in the film as well who talk about how this like the whole thing is like, well, science, you have to like be able to replicate the experiment and all that sort of stuff. So it's like, yeah, what is the point of this thing? Like,
yeah, and so maybe we should explain for people who haven't seen it, like what's the like basic experiment, because it was like 2 years. They wanted to do 2 years inside this kind of basically a giant greenhouse is what you're looking at.
I've got there's a picture of it.
Okay. Yeah. And they brought in plants and animals from all around the world. They even had like a mini ocean. It's quite big. The place is quite big.
It had like individual so it's like this is just one like chamber of the thing, and apparently, I mean this is kind of one of the apparents, but it's kind of like airtight, and I'm assuming this is like the rainforest or something like that biome basically. But there's like a rainforest like area. There was like they like replicated savanna somehow, and yeah, like you said, there's like a water area with like a living coral reef inside of it to start with. It's insane.
They had goats as well. They had like so basically like everything was sustainable. They were trying to be completely self-sustainable. So like they weren't allowed to bring in any food from the outside or anything like that. Everything had to be grown and reproduced and recycled from inside the sphere.
And actually, so one thing, because I noticed that's quite funny about this, is that in the documentary, when they mention like, oh, they had like an artificial sea and it had like living coral in it and stuff, they show like really impressive like pictures and video and stuff of the sea. But this is like a picture I found, like a recent picture I found online of the sea, and it's more like maybe a very large pool, right?
Yeah, actually, yeah, it's much smaller.
That's a good picture. It looks much bigger in that documentary. They make it out to be like, an actual sea, but apparently it had like living coral in it at one point, which is pretty cool.
You had fish in it as well.
That's crazy.
Yeah. But they, for some reason, they were also trying to be sustainable with air. So the whole thing was, the whole thing wasn't letting in any oxygen or wasn't letting out any carbon dioxide. So they reached the point where they had to use artificial oxygen machine to push oxygen around the place, and have a machine that would absorb carbon dioxide because the carbon dioxide buildup got too much. So they basically failed in that regard because they had to use artificial air or supplement
it's
the
weird,
air.
like, because I don't like. I guess one of the things was like to prove that you could colonize space or something like that, right? But I suppose it's just a question of like getting the balance right. I mean, they had like 8 people in there and a load of plants. Like maybe the plants were producing too much carbon dioxide. I don't know. Like those like machines for stripping out the carbon dioxide or the machines for producing the oxygen. Would that be possible in space or not? I don't know. But yeah, they gave the impression that towards the end, because of the levels were getting so low, like they were just pumping in like air from the outside in the end.
It probably would be possible if you're in space to have a machine to do this stuff. So I didn't understand entirely what the point of the experiment was, because I would presume if you were going to terraform a planet, you'd have lots of technology like that to make the space livable, oxygen machines and all that kind of stuff. So I don't really understand the point. It's interesting because like it showed the guy who started this group, one of the first things he did was he set up like a sustainable farming kind of community or something like that.
That's actually one of the interesting parts of the doc, is it kind of shows how they went from like a weird farming commune, and then they made like they actually like built their bare hands, they built like a ship that could go on the ocean.
Yeah. But like I can understand the idea of like sustainability and independence and like freedom in that sense with a farm, because it's like, okay, we don't have to rely on the market, you can make your own food and so on. But like trying to be sustainable and independent from the atmosphere, like we don't need your oxygen, world. We can have our own pod and our own set of oxygen. That part to me is weird because it's like, there's no expression of like freedom or independence in that. It's like that gets more into the pod territory, because the pod is like you're trying to insulate yourself from like the elements completely. You're not just trying to be independent and grow your own food on a farm in the countryside and you rely on the oxygen which is in the air. It's like, no, we're going to have our own pod and we're not even going to rely on the oxygen in the air. Like there's a kind of apocalypticism in it as well, because it's like, well, how can we sustain ourselves even if the air quality outside was so bad that like nothing survived, kind of thing. You're not in the world anymore. You're in your own little insulated area.
Yeah, it's weird as well, because like the reason they keep stating for it is that it proves that you can do a space colony or something, but it's like, well, space colony just going to hang out on the side of Mars and not do anything, like be self-contained, like
why?
A lot of the like language and stuff around what they're doing as well seems very like they mention in the thing that it's kind of biblical, like it has kind of like an arc in a way, and it does seem to have this kind of aura about it of being like, oh, we got to produce this thing that is ultimately sustainable, and not like so like sustainable in the way that we see like, oh, this thing can be recycled, but everything can be recycled, like even the air and all that sort of stuff. It just has like this, it has the feeling that it's like one of our, like, we're trying to reach out for this paradise, this eternal thing that's completely sustained, doesn't need anything external, and gets rid of all the danger from the outside world as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's another element I thought was interesting, which was the candidate selection for who gets to go into it, because they're theater kids as well. So like they were doing like weird theater like rituals and exercises in order to determine, in order to determine who should be in this biosphere. So I thought, in the theme of Noah's Ark, where you're picking 2 of every animal to be saved, there's also a kind of biopolitics there of like you're picking who gets to be saved, and putting them into the chamber, which we presume is going to be used when the world ends, right? So it's like, who gets this? Who gets to be selected, like natural selection, but it's not natural. It's directly like artificial and political selection, but it's like, who gets to be selected? And it was just funny because you had like this scene in it where the guy who runs everything was like doing these weird theater exercises and like judging who gets to be in it. And I was like, how are you? Like, you're just looking at people like running around screaming and wearing stupid costumes, and like, this is your judgment of who gets to repopulate the human race,
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird because they pretty much, like, you can see them here, the 8 people they choose to go in, but they're pretty much all of them. I mean, there's a couple doctors in there, but they're pretty much all people who were either on the original like commune, the ranch, or took part in like building this ship. And yeah, like you said, they're all like, they're not necessarily like scientists, and that's kind of one of the critiques as well. Is that for them, it's more of a like commune thing as opposed to like experiment.
Yeah, I think there was one marine biologist and one engineer, and one doctor, but the rest of them were kind of like characters. They were kind of funny characters. They weren't like technically,
It's interesting as well. You mentioned the whole repopulation thing. Is like, if there's certain criteria that's used to select who goes out and colonizes space, like all the human colonies in space are going to be filled with like a certain type of person, perhaps.
Yeah.
Kind of worries me. Like, it's going to be the human representation out in the universe,
Well, like, somebody once told me that the reason the boomers, because all these people are boomers, right? That or most of them. I think the old guy's got to be dead by now because he was 60. When,
he must have been born in like the 1930s, and it's actually kind of funny. Like the doctor guy, the bald guy at the front, like he's got this whole thing about consuming as few calories as possible is the way you live. And he said, I'm pretty sure like humans can live to 120. And he was 60 there, and I mean, he looked pretty good. He looked pretty healthy and all that sort of stuff. But like it says at the end of the doc, like the guy dies at like 87. So
he doesn't survive till 120. He was really arrogant about it. He was like, I'm gonna survive till I'm 120 easily. It was really weird. But somebody once told he wouldn't be a boomer technically. He'd be like a prior to the boomers. But somebody once told me that the boomers have this mindset about them because they were born after like the biggest apocalyptic event in modern history, which is World War II, and of course the genocide and the nuclear explosions and all that kind of stuff. So they just have this like they have a kind of like narcissism of like surviving the apocalypse. It's like built into their generational mindset, that they have this sense that they are important because they kind of rejuvenated the planet after this big catastrophe, and that kind of really kind of so they think they're historically very special in that regard. And the funny thing is, like, for younger generations, we increasingly look at boomers like they're really incompetent. Like they're really incompetent. They're really kind of out of touch. They're really, and I don't mean out of touch like in a way like, you're not on TikTok. Like out of touch is in you're not in touch with reality. They don't really think over long-term generational issues. They kind of they're very short-sighted. They're very self-absorbed and so on. And I think that's very true. They are like that as a generation. And that really stuck out to me in this film because you see kind of like where this comes from. Their whole generation had this sort of like, it's kind of like a doomer apocalypticism, but it's not like the kind of doomer apocalypticism you might get with like a millennial or like a zoomer, where it's like everything's going to end and we're all hopeless. It's like this, like, yay, the world's over, but we're special. It's like Power Rangers doomerism or something. It's weird.
Right. Yeah, that's strange. I've not thought about it that way. It's interesting. It ties into our like birth rate discussion as well a little bit, because one of the things that stood out for me when they're interviewing the people who go in, I can't remember which one of these ladies it is, but one of them says, they moved to join the commune from New England because they didn't want to have kids and get married.
Oh yeah.
And that drives a lot of like people running off to join communes. You know.
Wouldn't saving the world be a lot easier just to have a few kids?
Yeah.
than like
Yeah.
go and live in an eco pod or something, you know?
So yeah, this is a. I don't know. I was pretty impressed by the actual building itself. You know, like I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And like, I'm kind of annoyed because it's in near Tucson, Arizona, and I was in Tucson, Arizona like last summer, and I didn't realize it was still a thing. Like, if I ever go back, I'm definitely going to go visit this thing. Like, because that's pretty much what it is now. You can like go on a tour.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, it's like a thing you can go to as a tourist, which is pretty funny, I think.
Mm.
So, okay, here's a question for you: Would you go into this thing for 2 years?
No,
Which is how
no
long
way.
you have to be in there for 2 years.
No way. I wouldn't. I would barely do it for 2 weeks.
Wait, is that because, so? You say you think you'd last 2 weeks, but you wouldn't have any like curiosity to do it at all.
I wouldn't. Not with these people. No.
Okay.
I'd kill these people. I would drown them in the pool or the ocean. But yeah, no, I don't know. Like, I just wouldn't. I just don't see the point in it. I don't get it. Like, I don't get the urge to. I don't see what's being accomplished by it. You know. I get the living sustainably on a farm. I get the appeal of that. I get the appeal of building a boat and traveling around the world, visiting different places, and maybe fishing outside the boat and being sustainable or just whatever. But I don't get the pod architecture appeal at all. Like, I'm really immune to it. Like, I'm really averse to it. I don't get it. So no. Would you?
I feel like if I was paid the right amount, maybe. But yeah, again, I think a lot of it would be dependent on who you were in there with, you know. Yeah, I'm sure you know the right amount of money might make me go. But,
like how much?
well, it's 2 years.
1 million.
Yeah, I'd probably do it for $1 million. I don't know. As long as I could bring. Well, this is actually an interesting thing because it was done in like the early 90s, right? So I'm thinking like it's going to have internet, it's going to have Netflix, it's going to have all the things I have. So I don't know. Am I allowed to bring my phone in? Like they didn't seem to have phones in the thing.
And also 2 years is a really interesting time frame because we were in lockdown for about 2 years.
Yeah, exactly.
So
this is what I'm thinking is that, like, you know, if I can bring like books in with me and notepads and stuff, I can work on stuff as I would on the outside anyway, and then, you know, when I come out, I get a nice big check. But again,
yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
maybe that's not part of the thing. I don't know, but and also, to be fair, it seems like they did a lot of like farming, like they had to do a lot of work to actually produce the food that they had to eat. You know.
Yeah. Like, I could see the appeal of doing that in just a farm in the middle of nowhere. I just don't get
and then it's even more ridiculous when they end up just opening it up and pumping air inside anyway.
Exactly. They ended up just pumping artificial oxygen in anyway.
Why do they need to build this whole thing? Like, why do they need to build this huge structure that contains all of these like very specific bits of like flora and fauna? It's very weird.
Well, there's a kind of tombing or a kind of wombing, isn't there? There's a kind of.
Oh, it's definitely, yeah. This is what I was going to say with the whole Eden thing. Is it's got that whole return to the womb thing because, like, I don't know, like in a way you can imagine being locked up in this thing and surviving like a nuclear winter or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah. But like the thing is, it's like, were they preparing for that in any way? I suppose they lived through the Cold War, so that was, you know, kind of nuclear threat.
I find that expression really funny, like living through the Cold War, because technically the war didn't ignite. So if you lived through the Cold War, you didn't do anything.
Well, this is the whole point. It's like, I lived through COVID. It's like, what, you lived through a disease which has like a 0.0000000% one chance of hurting you. It's like what? It's basically like we've sort of placed historical significance around living through a simulation.
Yeah, it's weird as well, because I think that if we did have, like, one thing I'm imagining is that, because I had like COVID or whatever we're calling COVID. I had that a couple times, and it made me kind of ill for like a week or so, and then I was fine, like having the flu or something. But imagine if they were like distributing like, oh, I survived COVID, like T-shirts or badges or something. It might like draw attention to how like ridiculously like undangerous that was for the majority of people, you know.
Yeah, it would be stupid, but like, but like this is the historical mindset that has emerged. I think it's like you've lived through an event which you no longer have to distinguish from like a real event. It's no longer like the actual details of the event don't matter. In its significance isn't determined by the actual event. It's determined purely by the narrative around the event, which we can just construct however we want. It's a simulation.
And yeah, that I don't know, like the kind of the saving the world thing was like really apt when one of the women were talking about when they first went in, and her expression she used, I don't know, she said she turned the rain on. So I guess they had like control over the rain or something. And she was like describing how it felt like she was washing the air and like creating like the world anew when she like turned the rain on. Very religious, like language and like symbology, I think.
Oh, definitely. It's very on the nose. Like like that's the funny thing about this documentary is that like it shows you how a lot of the kind of utopianism and the kind of scientism, especially in the US, I don't think it's as bad in Europe, but definitely in the US, that there's this sort of blatant projection of spiritual and religious needs and sentiments into this stuff. And it's so obvious, like it's not hidden at all. Like it's completely out there, you know. And there's no sort of ironic self-awareness about it at all. There's no even effort to kind of distinguish between the kind of hard science and the technical side and the kind of spiritual side. It's just the same thing.
Is it the distinction you made there between the US and Europe is quite interesting, because obviously, I mean, depending on who you ask, the Americans landed on the moon first, right? So they've got that claim to fame, and that's like the height of the space race for them, right? But like this whole endeavor, this whole pod endeavor, like seems kind of like pathetic by comparison to that, you know. And it kind of shows you like how the vision of what the US was trying to achieve in the space race has kind of been lost. And it kind of begs the question, like, especially and I believe this will be the case, as the US continues to decline and in a sense collapse, especially relative to other parts of the world that tend to have their stars rising now. Like, I'm wondering in what strange ways that like the lack of actual strength and the lack of actual purpose is going to manifest itself.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I suppose the moon landing was a government effort as well. Like, I think to achieve these really great things, you do need a state behind you, whereas this is a kind of an entrepreneurial thing. So it was interesting because there's this kind of startup culture to it as well, isn't there?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
This kind of weird, innovative, free thinking. Like, I remember when they were doing the candidate selection for this, the leader says, I want everyone to be a free thinker. He's like, I don't want anyone who follows. And I was like, dude, like, if you're going to conduct an actual program, you're going to need some people who are a bit more free thinking and some people who can follow. Like, not everyone could be like a leader here, you know. But this is the kind of weird entrepreneurial startup mindset, you know, everyone could be an individual, everyone. And I feel like that's kind of like the contrast between what like a state with a very rigid hierarchy. You know, it's not that these startups don't have hierarchies, they do, but if you look at China, for example, the way they could during COVID, and like I know China has like a lot of problems, and I'm glad I don't live in China, but the way they could, you know, build hospitals very quickly and so on, the way they could do these things very, very quickly, compared to a lot of countries in the West, it sort of became, I think, evident that a lot of this everyone be an individual, everyone, no one follows, everyone be your own person kind of ideology is very, very actually is not very helpful when you actually have to get shit done, right?
Yeah, right. You need people who are going to be reliable and run the systems that keep this like the larger system alive. And that whole Apple's got that, or they at least had that tagline, "Think different." It's like, well, yeah, think different and buy the exact same phone as everyone else.
Yeah, so there's like this really
buried within it.
Yeah, and there's like this real emphasis on like the narrative, and there's like no emphasis on the actual thing itself. It's like if we can narrate this thing to be this great historical endeavor, that's the important thing. It's like, well, what are you actually doing though? At least in the moon landing, they actually went somewhere, right? It's like, well, what are you actually doing? Well, nothing really important. We're just living on like a farm. We're living in a greenhouse for 2 years. That's basically what they're doing. Like. But if you could narrate it to be, and I thought it was funny because it was during the lockdowns that this film came out, and this film was basically an attempt to try and narrate this whole thing as if it was this great historical endeavor. And I think that the same thing was happening with like the lockdowns. It's like, we're part of history, man. We're gonna sit here and watch Netflix for 2 years. Yeah.
I think you're right. Like what's funny is like not only the actual Biosphere 2 project here. It mirrors that sort of, it's all kind of talk and not really like much substance. And it's funny how 30 years after the actual Biosphere, the film, the construction of the film follows that exact same pattern as well. Like we've critiqued the problem with the film is just kind of like it has about 20 minutes of like actual interesting content, and the rest is like about telling a story that isn't really there.
Yeah. And again, to kind of like bring it back to the boomers, it's like I noticed this during the lockdowns. I don't know if you saw that charity event. It was like it's kind of like a Live Aid kind of thing. This charity event for raising money for the World Health Organization, and it was all these boomer artists. It was all like Bob Geldof and Bono and all these people who were like basically just acting like they were in the 80s, and they were doing these like Zoom gig, Zoom. They were playing their cheesy ballads over Zoom, and it was people were just phoning in to get money. And I was just like, it's just like we're just having a big like deranged like senile funeral for boomer culture. Like this is what this is. Like it's a big simulacra of like boomers not accepting like that their kind of historical time is coming to an end.
And that's another thing about like boomer culture. Is that we do need a funeral for boomer culture, because it seems that it just repeats itself. Like you said, it's like all these like Bob Geldof and Sting and shit pretending they're back at Live Aid.
Yeah,
it's like it's not 1980 anymore, and it's weird because we get the same stuff repeating every 10 or so years. Music like in loads of like entertainment fields, but it's becoming really obvious with like the films, like with films and stuff, like especially with Cape shit. Like,
yeah,
it doesn't feel. I mean. It doesn't feel like there's anything new, And like lots of documentaries like this are just rehashing like conspiracy theories that happened like 30 years ago, or like things that happened in the 90s. It's very weird.
I kind of wondered watching this what Mark Fisher would have thought of this because of his whole hauntology thing.
Oh yeah, that would be good. Yeah.
Because there's a sense of which boomers they want to relive the golden years over and over and over again. And you could even interpret something like this as like, we don't want to accept that we weren't as important as we said we were. And we're just going to have a bit of humility and grace and just get older and just hope that, like invest in the future. So what we're going to do is we're going to like try live forever in like a different planet or something, constantly rehashing the golden years and doing that over and over and over forever and ever and ever. And it kind of gets very zombie-like,
Yeah, I understand got that, because it's like, well, 30 years before the Biosphere 2, you had the space race, and then you have Biosphere 2, and then you have it coming back 30 years later again for a documentary during COVID 2, which again, it does have that sort of like, it gives that like heroic tinge to what's currently going on in the world. Yeah, it's very weird and very, very hauntological, to use Mark Fisher's language, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think just hearing what he would have like written about COVID would have been so interesting, to be honest with you.
Yeah, although I do slightly fear, well, not to go off on a tangent about Mark Fisher, but I do fear that his kind of like his devotion to leftism may have held him back in being honest about everything. But who knows? He
it's
may have,
possible. Yeah, he might
may
have
have
avoided a
flicked.
lot of the the liberal stuff, pro-vax stuff. Yeah, it's possible. He's not quite as spicy as someone like Nick Land, for example.
We kind of need a bit more of a reactionary version of Mark Fisher today. I think that would be helpful in the world.
Yeah, I'm kind of optimistic about that because I think that even in the mainstream, it's becoming obvious that the left-right divide doesn't make any sense. Like, and it's also a containment strategy because, I mean, like, just to talk in historical terms, like the reason why it's called left and right is because it was the left side of the General Assembly in Republican France that was the revolutionary side, and it was the left side who were the Girondins and were they're considered more conservative, but they would be called classical liberal by today's like labels, and like it's a framing that just completely doesn't. I don't know why we're using it, and I think it's used more often to contain and set people against each other who don't actually have that much like difference with each other. Like I feel like things like COVID make that really obvious to someone who actually wants to think about it.
Yeah, definitely. I think in the future it'll be determined by, do you sit on the left side or the right side of the ecopod sphere?
That's how we're trying to frame it. I'm hoping that we can break out that framing, But
yeah, fair.
I'm trying not to use the words left and right, for that reason. But I think it's really difficult, especially when you've that's been the way you speak about it for the whole time you've known about politics. Basically, it's very weird.
Yep. What did you think of the leader of this group, the John Allen fella?
He was the guy. He was out. Was he outside the pod? I'm confused.
Yeah. He wasn't in the pod. He kind of started the whole group that led to this thing, and he was this very kind of charismatic guy who was. I think he was a bit older than the rest of them.
Yeah.
And he was a military. He was in the engineering corps of the military, so not the actual fighting or the infantry or anything like that, but in the engineering corps. And then he got a degree at Harvard doing something or other. And then like he's absolutely like typical like spook. I was like, if you're going to be like who's like part of the deep state, who's like a spook, who's like a spy or something, who's got weird connections, you're going to be like, were you kind of part of the kind of military or the intelligence infrastructure, but not as like a foot soldier, as like something more technical or something more managerial, and you have a degree from Harvard, and you happen to have all these connections to billionaires and so on and so forth. So like and you happen to be quite a charismatic person as well. Like he just reminded me of someone who was like definitely like there was definitely interest in doing these sorts of weird kind of experiments, which is funny because like if you think of it in terms of the amount of like business and potentially government attention that these things get, it kind of undermines their whole, independent, hippie, countercultural stuff, right?
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm talking about when I talk about containment. Like a lot of these, like apparently free thinking, apparently outside the box things are actually, funded and endorsed by the like largest corporations in the world and like the most important arms of government. But specifically on the kind of leader, the kind of the cult, I guess I would say cult leader. I think, to be honest with you, he just kind of blended into that archetype because I've seen so many of these documentaries that he just became that kind of archetype. I didn't really pay that much attention to him, but again, like the documentary really lacked the teeth that those sorts of people would normally have in a documentary like this, because it wasn't like sexual misconduct allegations or something like that came out about him. Like he was just a weird guy who wanted to control people, what people were doing.
Yeah, true.
Cool. So I think you'd be better off just looking up a YouTube video that summarizes this if you're interested in it, maybe reading a bit about it, or just listening to us now. we need to do.
Yeah.
You probably don't need any more information than we've told you today.
I think you can read an article about it. Definitely, you don't have to watch the whole film. It's not. And I paid because I downloaded it on Pirate Bay, but then the sound wasn't working, so then I paid like €4 for renting it on YouTube. So it was a bit of a waste of money. So
Someone's going to clip that. Like Raymond admits to downloading from Pirate Bay. They're going to
oh
get
no, don't
you. They're
get
going to
me.
get you on that one, man.
Don't lock me in the pod and the gulag pod, please.
Is actually just to talk about like piracy for a second. You know, like it was like piracy was kind of like a big deal. You know, back when in DVDs when they would have that PSA at the beginning of the DVD, like you wouldn't steal a handbag.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like I remember piracy being kind of like a big deal. There'd be like campaigns against it and like warnings at the beginning of the film, like don't copy this and send it to someone who you're not supposed to. But like as technology's proliferated, the internet's proliferated, and like even like a normie can use a torrent basically. Like it's just kind of become tacitly accepted that that's what some people do. Like the option's there. I find that kind of funny.
It's only Dana White from the UFC who cares about this still. He hates pirating. Anyone who pirates the UFC, they've actually he actually paid like some sort of cyber group security company to like track down one time this person who kept downloading UFCs and actually had him like brought to court and stuff. It's like the one person left in the world who cares about this. So,
but that's I mean, maybe this is just showing my lack of cool guyness or manliness, but like they're like usually like pay-per-view things, right? You pay to watch the
pay-per-view.
They're expensive, right? They're not cheap to watch.
I think if you have like sport BT sport, like if you have a thing, you can like you can get them for very cheap or even free. I think if you have a subscription thing, like they're available through the subscriptions, but you can also buy them. I think depending on what country you're in, you can just buy them one off without any subscription, and they're a bit more expensive. Yeah. So yeah, they're definitely a way of making a lot of money. Yeah.
Uh-huh. But yeah, I don't know about you, but I found that like when I was let's just say I was a teenager and I didn't have a lot of disposable income, I wouldn't have like money to go and buy a DVD when I wanted to see a film, so I'd pirate a lot of stuff. But as my like, you know, like to watch this film on YouTube, what is it to rent? Like £2, like $3 or whatever. Like it's not a lot, and I just found that it's easier to like just go through the legit means than the illegit means. I think that's the right way of going about it, you know, myself.
No, I'm gonna keep downloading on Pirate Bay.
No, I mean that if people want you to pay for something, they should make it so easy to pay for something it makes sense.
Oh right, yeah.
They should make it easy. Yeah. I still occasionally torrent something if I can't find it conveniently.
Yeah.
It's a great way to end this. But yeah, don't pay to watch this. It's not great. That's my conclusion.
Don't pay to watch it, and beware of the experiments that they've built, because I think they've built a lot of the COVID ideas. I think they were looking at things like this, and I think there's a reason that to put my tinfoil hat on. There's a reason that this film was made in 2020, and there's a reason the New York Times did an article about it in 2020. I think that they sometimes look at these things with rosy sunglasses or whatever they're called, because there's something about them which is maybe like useful for some weird technocratic social engineering projects, which they may be thinking of conjuring up in the future. So beware, Anon.
Gang, ice cream so good.